Hey everybody, this is Hondo Carpenter, your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer on Sports Illustrated and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider podcast, joined now by my very good friend, an accomplished journalist and successful attorney in the Buckhead, Atlanta area of Georgia. He joins us 46 weeks a year, other than training camp. He comes in and we really dig in around legal issues around the league. We talk about a lot to do with the Raiders. John, I'm going to start at what I think is the most pivotal thing today inside Raider Nation, and that is the need for a fast start. The Raiders need to go into La La Land in a couple days. They need to go in there and get a win. I think Jim Harbaugh is a very good coach. I think Antonio Pierce is too. I'm not that's not a slam on Antonio, but they're learning three new systems: special teams, offense, defense. The Raiders are learning some things different, still building off some other things. But the Raiders, I think, have a very good roster. This is a Raider team that should win there. It's Allegiant Southwest. The crowd's going to be in their favor. How big? It also sends a message. Last year, wasn't hype. We're building off of it. We start on the road. We get a win. I just think this is a monster game. Now, season's not over if they lose, but I think the Raiders need a very fast start. And what a way to get it than in California. Your thoughts?
We have talked about this going back to when the schedule came out. We've got the great bookend of Chargers on both ends. This is as close to a must win as you can get, I think, in week one for the Raiders. This is a game teed up for the Raiders. This is a rivalry game. This is a game where they're going to benefit from having Antonio Pierce, even though it was a different team and different coordinators, different setup in many ways last year. They're going to benefit from him being the leader and the coach of this team. This is going to show up this week. This is when it's going to show up. This is extremely important for the Raiders. And to get off to a start against a rival on the road, it's hard to ask for anything more. I really think they have the advantage. Now, this game may look differently at the end of the year, which is actually, believe it or not, going to be in January. That's how long this season is going to go. This one's ready. The Raiders are ready. What I look for is the intensity of the defense. What I look for is a really tough sled for the Chargers to move the ball. This is one the Raiders need to get. They know they should get it. I think they're ready to get it. This is going to get them set up for a much better feel for the start of a season than we've seen in quite a while.
John, you are a very successful attorney and tremendous at what you do. The other day, I get a text from an NFL player, not a Raider, but another player, that said to me, "Have you heard anything about the league possibly canceling the game in Brazil and bringing it back to America?" And I just sent back question mark because I hadn't heard anything about it. I'm just kind of in a Raider thing. And he began to talk about, I had not seen this, but evidently players are being told stay in your hotel room. Players are telling their families don't come to the game. There's a lot of security concerns. And as he began to talk to me, he began to talk about, why are we going someplace where we're all in this danger that people don't want their family to even go there? And I mean, it's a great concern. And here's where I'm going with all this. If you're warning your players, or I'll give you a quick example. I have a friend whose daughter was I don't remember if she was an Amazon or a UPS or FedEx driver, but one of those drivers. And she goes up to deliver a package, and a person's dog attacks her and mauled her arm just brutally. And when they go to court, the owner of the house says, "Well, I shouldn't be blamed. I have a beware of dog sign." To which his attorney's face lost all of its color and basically said, "You should never have a sign like that because that's admitting you have a problem dog." I'm just saying this. How much is the NFL setting themselves up for, if there is an incident down there with their players, of how much of the liability are they opening themselves up to?
They may be opening themselves to a great potential liability, potentially. Now, what you're seeing is trying to protect and really insulate from that. So advice and or requirements or demands to stay in a hotel and only stay in certain areas where there is security, it doesn't surprise me. This is a first impression as far as the NFL going all the way down to Brazil. It's a big country. There are a lot of high value people on all of these teams, obviously. It doesn't surprise me that there's some trepidation. We saw some issues in Brazil when the Olympics was there. If you remember, there was a Zika virus going there, and a lot of professional golfers who were some of the more higher profile for that event didn't even go, including Rory McIlroy, if some folks may remember. So here you have the NFL with the international push. It's a strange trip. Again, one, I think the Eagles probably feel a little bit slighted that they've been asked to make. And now you're seeing it get a little complicated by your family can't come or they shouldn't go, or we've got to stay in our lanes and stay inside a hotel. It doesn't surprise me because the air here is to err on the conservative side. At the same time, it doesn't do a whole lot for players. Now, how does that compare with a trip to Chicago or a trip to Dallas? I don't know. You know, as far as their freedom of movement in a traditional NFL city, that may be different, but I'm not sure how big a difference it makes. The focus here for the NFL is clear. They want a clean game to go off. Ideally, it's entertaining, and there's no issues with the Peacock stream. If that happens, that's a win for the NFL. Are the players kind of being used here as little pawns in a bigger scheme of an international push? Of course they are. They are the players. The owners are the owners. That flex is understood.
Yeah, fine. It's interesting to me. I'm going to tell you, John, I briefly alluded to this on yesterday's podcast. I pride myself, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but having my finger on the pulse of the league. I talk to a lot of players, coaches, management, that kind of stuff. I have never, and listen, we got 6 years to the next collective bargaining deal. That was a brilliant move to go 10 years. I have never seen the players, even in a strike, as angry towards the league as there is now. There is a general, this is going to be braced for a war. And I'm going to say this to you. I would not be shocked, and I'm not predicting it yet, if there's a strike before the deal is over with the heavy-handedness of the NFL. I think they're getting tired of it, and I think it's fascinating. I mean, one of the things that blows my mind, Peter King came out, and I like Peter, know him personally, been around. I'm not saying we're buddies, but know him personally. I like Peter, don't always agree with Peter, but I like Peter. And he came out and talked about gambling and all of these adding of games. I know that the NFL has carte blanche to go to 18. It was part of the agreement. I get that. I understand it. But now you're hearing people talking about going to 20 games. That's just not happening. It's not happening. And it shouldn't. And I'm a guy that loves football. I want as much as I can get. But that's stupid. The Roger Goodell being God, jury, judge. I'm just telling you, there is I've never experienced it. Now, listen, it's 6 years away. So most of these guys aren't going to be playing. But there is just a groundswell of resentment towards the league. This is going to be fascinating for me to see how this gets resolved.
Let me ask you two things on that. Number one, you talked about the turnover in the league. What you're talking about is the average lifespan of an NFL player is not, means that half the league or so is going to turn over between now and the next 6 years. If the average lifespan is 4 years or so, that's one thing. Number two, the important question that people probably want to hear from you is how many NFL players would it take to move something like that forward? Are we talking about a third of NFL players, a half? Is it something like 3/4 of the NFL players would need to push forward for a strike? As far as the critical mass number, what kind of percentage of the NFLPA membership would be needed to do something like that?
Well, first, let me say, I don't think it's close. I don't think it's close now, but I said, notice I said about with 2 years left on the deal or something. Here is what I think. In the past, Most fans don't know this, but there is a lot of resentment because everybody thinks these guys are making 60 million a year. And it's a very small group that's making the big, they're all making big money, but it is a very small group that's making that headline grabbing money. And so there's a lot of resentments when the superstars come out and, we're not playing well. And these other guys, I remember the last strike, a friend of mine making a lot of money, but nowhere near top tier. He's like, okay, I make a lot of money, but I pay a lot of taxes too. I'm in a higher tax bracket and I'm not making 30 million, which that was the big money. I think it was 20 or 30 million. He goes, I'm not making that. So when it's like when LeBron James in the last when the NBA was having issues and all the players are like, shut up. You're worth a lot more money than all of us with outside interests and commercials. I think now I've never seen the NFLPA as united as they are right now, ever. I've never seen it. And we're talking from the high earners to the UDFA groups. These guys are getting it now. We are a brotherhood. And I credit this is all the players. It's not the leadership. It is all, and it's some of the leadership. I'm trying to hedge my words and be careful here. I don't want to say too much, but they are united and they're understanding now. I had a person that I would consider a superstar in this league, not a Raider, say to me over 4th of July, he goes, I think it's time for some of us big earners to really start thinking about, the other 85%. I goes, I think we have to think more about the league and less about us. And he said, I remember when I wasn't a big earner thinking I wish those guys thought about me. And he goes, and I thought I would become that. And I thought when I did, I want to leave this better than what I got. It's very fascinating to me. I think right now the NFLPA is growing their muscles. I think there's a fight coming. They've all universally had it with Roger Goodell. They've completely had it with him. I can just tell you, I don't know. Now, I know they won't say this publicly. I don't know a player right now. If I said up or down on Roger Goodell, what do you think? It's this. They don't, and I don't think that's all fair to Roger either. They agreed to it, but it's just fascinating to me. So, what percentage? I think if 5 to 10% of the group, and this would have to include some big names, came out and said, listen, we all have a lot more money. We can weather a strike. We understand that. But at some point, we got to look at the game after us. And I'm telling you, this is the first time where those guys are thinking about the entire game. And I'm not a strike guy, but I think the players at some point are going to have to push back for the health of the game. It's just not safe. I'm not saying football, but when you start talking 20 games, it's just insane. I'm there every day. I see the beating that these guys take. It's a beating. 20 games is so stupid. I had a player tell me this 4th of July weekend. He said the only people asking for 20 games are the people who didn't play, who are cashing the bigger checks because we're cattle. We're cattle. He goes, now we're well-paid cattle. He goes, and I disagree with people who've used other words. We've agreed to it. He says, but at some point, he goes, I don't think we should go to 18 games without an expanded roster. And he goes, I don't want 20. I don't care what they paid me. I wouldn't pay to play 20. I think it's funny, and I think it's coming. And we've always been ahead of the curve on this. We were ahead of the curve on Big Ten expansion when I broke the story that the Big Ten was expanding years ago. and added Nebraska. We've been ahead of the curve. We reported this probably 8 to 10 years ago, that we were hearing that eventually the Power Five are breaking away from the NCAA. We broke that and said at the time, people are going to laugh about this, but and John, you know who we were talking to, are telling us this is coming. Now it looks like it's coming. And I'm just telling you, I've never seen it. And it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating. Go ahead.
It's interesting because if you look back at 10, 12, 14 years ago, the NFLPA was not in the same ground. There was push and pull on who the leaders would be. And, you know, I think they have learned from the mistake. They needed to expand the rosters back then, without question. Now, we've talked on this show and we did the math. You could see it. 18 game schedule regular season is perfect. 6, 6, and 6. That makes total sense. They need to put their foot down on that one. They need to expand the game day rosters to something like 70, somewhere between 65 and 70, and start doing things. And they can present themselves. The players can present themselves as, we are out for the best interest of the sport in the game as a whole. Those guys, a few of those guys that own it, are really only out for the best interest of their pocketbook. And some of their teams stink. Some of their teams don't compete for championships. Some of those owners are here for business beyond primary interest. Their interest is business. We are not. We are interested for the best interests of the game. This is a story to watch. It is a slow simmer. Like you said, a 6-year timeline, looking for something maybe 2-3 years before to bubble up. Who knows what happens in the meantime? Let's see what kind of reaction these players get who are sent down to Brazil. And like we've talked about already, let's see what kind of reactions those football teams have when they come back. Time zone wise, not a huge deal for neither of these teams. Not for Green Bay, not for Philly. Travel-wise, huge deal. I'm going to go on an easy limb. Most of these guys have never been on a trip that long and never been on a trip that long back. That is an extraordinarily long trip.
It's a 10-hour flight.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, let's see what the response is, what the reaction is. We see the bigger picture here. This is a push that I think is going to be a 5-decade push for the NFL to spread internationally. That may be how long they think it's going to take. There should be resistance to it. Maybe this ignites the players to realize, hey, we got to take a step forward here. If they do it wisely, they can present themselves as the best stewards of the game, the ones looking out for the best interests of the NFL and the game itself. And they, you know, it would make sense to make a longer term presentation of that rather than right when the negotiations start in somewhere between 4 and 5 years.
John, couldn't agree with you more. I just find it fascinating. And I'm going to tell you something. I had an NFL GM tell this to Shannon and I. We were at dinner with an NFL GM, and he made a comment at what point do you keep expanding then where you become baseball and every game doesn't matter? Now, let me just say something.
After 18. After
right,
18.
and that's what his argument was. You know, he told Shannon and I, 18's coming. There's no getting around it. It's coming. But he said, when you get over that now, you're becoming baseball. And what does baseball do? It doesn't really sell out other than opening day until you get to the playoffs. The NFL is predicated on that every week must watch. And now he would lose his job for saying that publicly, but it's what he thought privately. And I thought it was fascinating. All right, let's get on to the next. Man, we have some, and this is what I love about our show every week. We're talking about issues long before they come up, but people are informed about them. I love that.
Yes.
John, let's get to the next one. The curse of Trey Lance. Now, obviously, the Niners were so fortunate in that draft because they got Brock Purdy as Mr. Irrelevant. But let's talk about the curse of Trey Lance and the pressure on the 49ers, because here's the big deal. They paid Ayuk. They're going to end up paying Trent. We know that. I mean, he deserves every dime of it. That guy's a stud. But then all of a sudden, they're going to have to make a big decision on Purdy. And part of the reason they've been successful is they haven't had so much money wrapped up in quarterback. The curse of Trey Lance. Talk about the pressure on the Niners this year.
Well, doesn't it feel like there's an extraordinary pressure on the 49ers? They've come so close to winning another Super Bowl, yet it feels like things are starting to slip away. Some things they can control, some things they obviously cannot control. When one of your players gets shot, you don't have to control that. What we're seeing is some individual interests rise to the top. I'm not necessarily criticizing Williams. I'll criticize Ayuk a little bit. These guys have, rightly or wrongly, they've put their business interest over the interest of the team to win, and they've caused some disruption. Kyle Shanahan is the undeniable star of that team. It seems like that is a guy that has an edge on the other people he goes against. And unbelievable work to get Brock Purdy to play at such a high level. How much pressure, though, is around that bay right now? How much pressure is on the 49ers that this is the year they have to get a Super Bowl? Because what it seems like is their window starts closing now. It's going to start closing. Now, if they don't get this Super Bowl this year, you're going to have even more pressure, more challenge, less likely to get it beyond this year of 2024. It's really interesting to watch. I don't think there's a team in the NFL starting this week that has more pressure on it than the 49ers. We talked about the potential curse of Trey Lance last year. This is, again, where I think it could show up. It's nothing against Trey Lance. It's against what they did with that pick. What if the 49ers come up another player short again late this winter and they don't end up with the Super Bowl? If that's the case, you can write that curse of Trey Lance into ink. The 49ers, the pressure on it, the ability to manage it, this is one of the most fascinating stories as we start this season.
Could not agree with you more, John. I think it's fascinating. Again, I couldn't agree anymore. I think there's a lot of pressure. And I'm going to tell you, I made this comment after they fired the defensive coordinator. They did not lose the Super Bowl, and I was there, because of their defensive coordinator. It was a panic move. And I said at the time, the moment they fired him, I don't think them or the Chargers, them or the Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl this year for different reasons. I don't think either will. Unless they both show up, I don't think they will. Now, let's talk about Dabo learning from the past Giants coaches who's stuck with an iffy quarterback. We're talking about the New York G-Men. Imagine the pressure. Now, I think this is a fascinating story. You've got the potential of Bill Belichick going back to the New York G-Men. The potential of Bill Belichick going to Dallas. Who fires their coach first to not let the other sign Belichick? But Dabo's going back to go forward.
Brian Daboll is a fascinating guy. He's a guy.
I said Dabo. I'm sorry. I'm thinking Dabo Sweeney. It's Daboll. I just screwed that up.
Brian Daboll, in a funny way, is a guy. This guy comes out of Canada. He's a GA at Michigan State when I'm a student there. And what an amazing ride for a career. He's the head coach of the New York Giants. That's fantastic. But his hands are tied. They are tied to Daniel Jones. If nothing else was taken from the fascinating offseason Hard Knocks with the Giants, it was how tied, or you can use another word, the Giants are to Daniel Jones. They are stuck with him. Their whole franchise has been shaped by the contract that somebody agreed to. Now, Daboll is no idiot. He knows what happened to Pat Shurmur, for example, who was stuck with a bad quarterback situation in New York and how that worked. He wants to say, listen, this is on me. I'm taking the reins. I am calling the plays. This is Brian Daboll saying he is going to call the plays for the Giants this year. That tells me a couple things. Number one, the buck stops here with Brian Daboll. That's cool. Number two, he will make a change to the quarterback position if he sees fit, whenever he sees fit, and he's not going to care because it's his tail that's on the line. And he's stuck in this situation, and he knows what's happened to coaches in the past who've been stuck with bad quarterback situations in New York. This is so interesting because this talks about this really, you talk about the mold of a football team, and when you overpour or you put too much into one compartment, it affects everything else that's done. His hands are significantly tied by what's gone on with the Daniel Jones contract. At the same time, they are super excited, as everyone knows, about their wide receiver neighbors that they drafted in the first round. And this is going to be an interesting thing to see because Daboll has a tremendous amount of experience. He's tremendously proficient in calling plays. Let's see how he can walk that tightrope when he knows. It's not that he knows these other guys are over his shoulder, Belichick and maybe Saban or who knows. It's that he knows how the dominoes fall when the quarterback situation in New York, when anything goes bad, but especially the quarterback situation. I like this approach. He's saying, you know what? I'm going to rise or I'm going to fall. It's going to be based on me this time. It's not going to be based on somebody else who may be a fantastic coach, also may be qualified to call plays at the NFL level. It's going on the Dabes. Brian Daboll is a guy to watch. Let's see how fiery it gets between, say, week 1 and Columbus Day.
Let's stay in Gotham and talk about the Jets, Jets. Saleh, let me just say something. I like Aaron Rodgers, but this is a franchise that seems to live in constant discombobulation. Is he just a dead man walking as far as his job?
Oh, yeah. He's a dead man walking. He knows he is. It is tricky. You know something about the Jets that I'm curious what the people out there think. You know, Rex Ryan went to 3 straight AFC title games, and I don't think he got any credit for it. I'm not saying he should be put into Canton for it, but people wrote off stupidly a very successful run that they had there. Now, Robert Saleh, everything looks great on paper. It starts to crumble. They've gone all in, whether it was Saleh's decision or not with Aaron Rodgers and him picking the offensive coordinator. They're stuck where they are. And Saleh, he's got to be getting ready for the next step. I'm not actively. Obviously, he's a fascinating guy. He's got a huge family. He's got a massive golf addiction, which is great. Fantastically crazy about golf. He's going to need some mental rest at some point this season. All gas, no brakes is an interesting approach. It may work, but when it doesn't work, you got to significantly rebuild. The Jets right now look like they're about to run out of gas. A very interesting thing, though. Saleh is no idiot at all. He's a smart guy. Another former GA at Michigan State, of course. He reached out to some folks who've had challenges and struggles. And one of them, of course, the great Bill Parcells. And Bill Parcells relayed to him the best advice I ever got. Who did he get that advice from? Bill Parcells got that advice in 1983 from Al Davis. He said simply this: just coach the team. That's the best advice I ever got. Don't get sidetracked. Don't do anything else. Just coach your team, and if you win, it will take care of everything else. So Parcells, talking to Saleh, says, hey, just coach the team. Let me tell you what Al Davis told me that was the best advice I ever received. Robert Saleh is going to do his thing, and he's going to coach the team. That hasn't been the problem. Everything that's happened around his time at the Jets has been along with way too high expectations. The Jets are an interesting thing to watch. People are looking at them, waiting for it to explode and blow up. In fact, we may have just there's 2 on the burner in the state of New York. How long is it going to be until the tabloid and the back thing and the sports radio is talking about which coach is going to get fired first? It's going to be too soon. Saleh is a good coach. He may be a better coordinator than a head coach. It looks like he is stuck in a bad situation with, I think, a bad owner. It's going to be, again, interesting to watch. Everybody wants to see what can be done. And who knows, maybe there is some unbelievably great quarterback play somehow left in Aaron Rodgers that has not really played meaningful football in a very long time now because of what happened last year on Monday night's opener.
All right. I want to talk about the changing face of the NFL. You look at Dan Campbell, DeMarco, at Houston. You look at AP, who coming with the Raiders. These former players getting a shot and having success. The NFL is a copycat league. Yes, you look at, Miami. Sorry, got to say it like everybody else. Miami. You look at the Dolphins. You look at what they're doing, obviously, with not a former player, but it's an outside the box. You're looking at John Harbaugh, which was an outside the box. They went with a special teams guy. My point to you, John, is the NFL is changing from the dictatorial coach to still dictatorial, but able to put a boot in your butt and make you look forward to the trip. I like the way the NFL is changing. Your thoughts?
I like the way it's changing in that I like the way it's changing overall. I like the way that it's changing in that players are asking why. Why do I have to do this? Why is this that? Why is this that? And the coaches that can explain that, and they can explain that, and they can also demand that you reach the standard, that these are the job duties that you have and you have to perform them. And if you don't, we have to move on. I think that works. There's a relatability to Ryan Poles that we saw in the Hard Knocks finale, dismissing and cutting a guy who's literally been there and been cut. Same with Dan Campbell. There's a circle of life, of course, for an NFL player. You don't know if it's one training camp and you don't even make a team, or 17 years and you can't do it anymore. So I think that this sport is better for guys who have played and had different levels of success moving on the way up. I don't know if we saw that in other sports. When you think about baseball managers, when you were a kid, when we were really young, how many guys were former catchers and how many guys were players, and that seemed to be on the rise up. I
remember Pete Rose being a player coach.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. That was wild. We may see that again in golf in the Ryder Cup next year, but I don't know if we're ever going to see that again in a real live game. No way. But this is an interesting thing. You've got the whiz kids, and when Mike Shanahan was hired at Washington, it was like, okay, let's see if this retread can do it. His legacy is going to be incredible because it's all the assistants that he hired who are tremendous offensive mind coaches, which is incredible. Now, a lot of those guys weren't players. A couple of those guys are literally freaks of nature. Like Sean McVay has absolute photographic memory that he can remember, which train he took from Atlanta to get to the airport in 95. You've got Mike McDaniel, who's, he's seems like his mind is running plays all the time. He's got the football field completely mapped out. He's got how many steps Tyreek Hill needs to get to this distance. I mean, it's just like, whoa, that's a unique legacy that Mike Shanahan's left. It's funny because you track those guys and they're also in that mix of the evolving NFL head coach. What am I looking for next, I guess? I'm looking for a guy that just got out of the league, who's an assistant now under one of those guys from that Shanahan tree. And I want to see how he does when he gets a climb up. This is always evolving and it's always moving. There's always good and not so good coaches in the NFL. I know you had an opinion on the one that was with the Chargers in recent years. As we start the new year, we are looking around Harbaugh. We are looking around, obviously, New York, like we talked about. We are looking at Miami because, folks, every single game, you tell your Dolphin friends, we're watching you every single week. It feels like the Dolphins have nearly no margin for error. They have got to get a home field playoff game if they expect to advance out of round one. It's fascinating stuff. The sport's always evolving and changing. I'm kind of with you. I like where this is going. And, we got to give it up to Houston. Everybody's going to be watching Houston too. That was such a great story last year with DeMeco Ryans, with CJ Stroud. Can they pick up where they left off? Do they take a step forward? Do they take a little step back? It's endlessly fascinating. That's why it is the most popular form of entertainment and the most competitive sport in this country.
Totally agree. He is the great John Shop. He joins us each and every week. Johnny, do me a favor real quick. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media.
Oh, I bark it at JP Spartan. That's my spot.
All right, good deal. John, we'll see you again next week. He's the great John Shop. Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow.